This will be part 2 of our how to create a hatch pattern for AutoCAD. In the first installment of this video series, we looked at the basics of creating a hatch pattern, and we looked at a simple hatch pattern that we created together. In this one, we're going to look at a little bit more complex hatch patterns and show how to create those as well. Let's begin by looking at this pattern here that's called Dolomite. It's got continuous lines that go horizontally, and then it's got lines at 45 degrees that start, and then they skip a couple lines, and then they start again. If I go to the AutoCAD pattern for this, you'll see here it is, this Dolomite pattern for geological rock layering. And instead of just having one pattern or one line for the, one line of code, it's got two lines of code here for the hatch pattern itself. So looking at the first line, it starts at an angle of 0. It goes through 0, 0. It's got an x offset of 0 and a y offset of 0.25. But notice that there's no line description here, and that's because if we look at it here, it's just a continuous line. It doesn't have any dashes at all. So again, it starts, it goes at angle 0, it begins, it goes through 0, 0. The x offset is 0 because it doesn't matter, there's no dashes, and the y offset is 1/4 of an inch. So from this line to this line, it's 1/4 of an inch. The second line here is this one. It starts with 45, which tells us that this next line goes at an angle of 45. It also goes through 0, 0. So if I just roll this over here a little bit, you'll see that it goes at 45 degrees. It goes through 0, 0. That's my origin point there. It has an x offset of 0 and then a y offset of 0.707106778. Okay, so what that means is remember, in the direction of the line, this is the direction of the line, the next one's going to start with an x offset of 0. So this point is perpendicular to that point. That's my next start point there. And then, so the x offset is 0, and the y offset is the distance from that point to that point, which is 0.707106778. And then the last two here are the line pattern itself. So the positive number 0.353 so on is the length of this line, and then the y, okay, is the space between that start there and that start there. Notice that they carry this way out, okay, beyond what even AutoCAD will show you. They carry it way out to I don't know, what is that, 15 places behind the decimal or so. And that's so that if you were to zoom in on this exactly, it doesn't matter how close you zoom, it's always going to appear to show up. Now, you'll notice that when you get close to an AutoCAD hatch pattern, that sometimes it does tend to kind of freak out a little bit. We know that that doesn't actually take place. But if you could continue to zoom in on there, it's going to get very, very close. Okay, so what we're going to do next is I'm going to show you how to create your own multi-line hatch pattern. I'm going to start by deleting this hatch pattern that they have, and then I'm going to create the hatch pattern over here on the side. Now, my advice when you're creating a hatch pattern of your own is to draw the hatch pattern out just using lines. That way you can kind of have something to measure. So I'm going to turn my snap on just to make it easy. I'll set my snap to 1/8 of an inch. And then I'm just going to use the line command here, and I'm going to draw something that looks like parallelogram. So we'll make it 1/4 of an inch here, and then we'll give it let's do it a 1/2 inch long. Let me start over with this. So I'll say let's go a line from here. We'll make it 1/2 inch long, and then we'll give it 1/4 of an inch space in between. Then we'll make it 1/2 inch long again. Right? You get the idea here. And then to make a simple parallelogram, I'm just going to copy these two lines, say from up. So that would, if I do that and then that gives me something now that I can connect. So I can say from there to there and there to there. Get my drift here. Okay, so that's going to be my pattern. And then I'm just going to continue to copy and array this a little bit so that we kind of get an idea of what our pattern is supposed to look like when it's done. Okay, so here's the pattern that I want, and let's just take, and I'm going to copy my donut here so that, let's say that point right there is 0, 0, 0. Okay, so if I look at this, I'm going to have 2 lines of code. Well, let's start with this. I'm going to have a line of code here. Okay, it's going to start at 0, 0. So it's going to go at an angle of 0. It's going to start at 0, 0. Okay, it's going to have a pattern of 1/2 of an inch down, 1/4 of an inch up, 1/2 of an inch down, 1/4 of an inch up, and my x offset is going to be 1/8 of an inch. My y offset is going to be 1/4 of an inch, right? So I could come in and I could use my measure and I could say, okay, see how the x offsets and y offsets. This is one of the nice things about AutoCAD 2020 is it gives us all this information here so that we know how big everything is. Okay, if I come in and measure this, I can do that. Or if I turn off, if I say, if I just use my distance, I could just do it old school and I could put it in there. So you see here it's my delta x is 1/4 of or 1/8 of an inch. My delta y is a 1/2 or 1/4 of an inch. Okay, so what I'll do here now is I'll just go back to here and I'm going to say let's create a new one, new, and I'm going to call this one parallelogram. So again, starts with a star, parallelograms, parallelograms. Okay, and I don't have to give it a description, but I will. So parallelogram hatch. Okay, and then my second one here is going to have this first line of code. So again, it starts off at an angle of 0. We want that first line to go through that 0, 0 point. So I'll say 0, 0. And then we have our x offset and our y offset. Remember, those go at the angle of 0. So our x offset is 0.125, comma, our y offset is 1/4, comma, and then we have our line pattern. So it's going to be down pin for a 1/2 of an inch, comma, and then up pin -0.25 for the y pattern. Press enter, and now I'll save this again. Again, I still have my search path in there, so I'll change this to all files, and I'll call it a parallelogram, because remember the names have to match. So parallelogram .pat. Remember, this name here has to match this name here or it won't work. So I say save. And so now when I come back to AutoCAD, if I just come over here and I say, all right, I want to hatch this area, hatch, and go down to my user hatches at the bottom. There it is, parallelogram. And so you see it fills in the very beginnings, and you can kind of see where the hatch patterns are going to go. So this is going to be a parallelogram. This is going to be a parallelogram. This is going to be like the left side of a parallelogram, right? So that's how we're going to begin. Now, I suggest you do this. Now that we've got that first line, now we can come back in and we can make it a little bit more complex. The next line that we're going to do will be the left side of each of the parallelograms. So we're going to do that line, and that line, and that line, right? And then it'll be, this line, and so on. So we're going to do the left sides of those parallelograms. So before we do this, we need to know the angle and that kind of stuff. Now, when I used the measure command a few minutes ago, and I just did the quick measure, you'll see here that it gives me an angle of 63 degrees on that lower left-hand corner of that. But that's actually not very accurate because it doesn't have any information. It's actually only about 62.5 degrees. So what you need to do is come in and change your units so that instead of the length being just 4 places, let's crank this all the way up, okay, to get as much accuracy as we can. And then the same thing about the angle here. Instead of just an angle of 0, let's crank this one all the way up like that. So now when I come in and I say, okay, let's get some information here. If I say, okay, let's do an angle, I want to know the this line here, and I need to turn my snap off. So snap off for just a minute. Okay, so if I come in here and I say, let's do this angle, I need the angle between that line and that line. You'll see here that it gives me a very accurate angle now, again, so that we can be very accurate when we do this. So I'm going to say, here's my angle for that next line. I'm just going to copy it right here out of AutoCAD, and then I'm going to paste it in here. So there's my angle, comma, and then we need our origin. This one still goes through 0, 0, so we'll say 0, 0, comma, and now we need our x offset and our y offset. Okay, so our x offset is from this point, how far over we're going to shift until we shift our left. So if this is the first one we're going to draw, this is going to be the second one that we're going to draw. What I can do is I can just draw a line from, say, that point there to perpendicular, just as a kind of a measuring reference. So my x offset is this distance, my y offset is this distance. Okay, because this is my first one I'm going to draw, this is the second one I'm going to draw. Remember, x goes in the direction of the line. So this is my first point, that's my second point. So now I can say, okay, let's do the distance from that point to that point. You'll see that it is 0.2236. Okay, so I'm just going to, again, copy that here and then paste it here. There's my x offset, followed by my y offset, which is now this distance from there to there. Okay, so there's my y offset. I can just copy that there, Control C, and then paste that there. And then finally, we have our pattern. So we have, this is our angle, our origin, x offset, y offset, and then we just need the pattern itself. So now the pattern, this is the length, and then followed by that space. So one last time, I'll go to distance. I'll measure the distance from there to there. Our distance is 0.27. So I'll copy that. And then that's my down pin distance, so there. And then comma and a negative, that same distance for the up pin. So I'll just paste it back in there. Make sure that I have the empty line at the end and save this. So now I can come back in and I can put in my next line. So if I come in and I say, okay, let's look at that, just marking it. So now notice that I have all of the left sides of all of my parallelograms. The only thing that I have left now is to do the right sides. So the only thing that's different between this line of code and this line of code is the origin point. Okay, so if I come back finally to this here, this line of code is the same for the left and the right side of my parallelogram. So I can just copy that and then paste it right back in here. Paste. The only thing that's going to be different is my origin. Instead of starting at 0, 0, it's going to start at 0.5, 0, because this is 0, 0. This is 0.5, 0. Okay, so now everything else will be the same. So I can now use that line of code to draw in the left sides of all of these. So finally, when I come in and I just make it think about it again, there we go. You've got your left sides of all of your parallelogram hatch pattern in there. One last thing that we want to look at is you don't have to only have one down up pin segment. Okay, so here I've got a down pin and an up pin segment. Remember that you can have up to, I think, like 12 down and up pin segments. So lines aren't always, down, up. Sometimes there's, a longer down and a shorter up, and then a medium down and a shorter up, and that type of thing. Think of like a phantom line. Okay, so you can have more than one down up pin segment, just like you did in a regular line command. So this concludes the tutorial on how to create hatch patterns in AutoCAD.